There is an island the United States Navy sealed off in 1947. And has never fully reopened. The official explanation is 4 sentences long. The classified file attached to it is over 300 pages. You are not supposed to know what's in it. By the end of this, you will know what happened on that island, why the Pentagon has spent 7 decades scrubbing it from the public record, and why the one journalist who got closest to the answer disappeared from public life entirely. Stay with me. Let's start with what the Navy has actually admitted, because even the official version is stranger than anything you'd find in a thriller novel. In the summer of 1947, a naval patrol vessel operating in the Pacific filed a report that was immediately escalated to the Office of Naval Intelligence. The report described what the crew witnessed on a small island, coordinates still redacted in every declassified version, as, quote, conditions inconsistent with known activity and incompatible with standard explanation. That phrase was the entire summary. 12 words. For a report that triggered a full naval cordon. Within 72 hours, the island was surrounded. Not visited. Surrounded. Supply vessels, a communications blackout, and standing orders that no civilian aircraft fly within 40 miles of the coordinates. Those orders remained active, quietly renewed every 3 years, until at least 1987. We only know that date because a Freedom of Information Act request in 2019 unearthed a single renewal memo, and then the original request was retroactively denied. The document was released by accident. Now here is the part the Navy has never explained. The island was not uninhabited before 1947. Census records, missionary logs, and pre-war shipping manifests all confirm a small but established population. Fishermen. A trading outpost. A Catholic mission established in 1931. By 1948, every reference to that population had been removed from State Department records. Not archived. Not classified. Removed. The mission's founding diocese in the Philippines has no record of it ever existing. You are not dealing with a clerical error. You are dealing with an erasure. To understand what the Navy found, you have to understand what was already there. During World War II, the Pacific Theater was a laboratory for the darkest corners of military science. Both sides were operating programs that never made it into history books. The Japanese Imperial Army's Unit 731 is the most documented: biological weapons, human experimentation, weapons testing on living subjects. What is far less documented is that the United States military was simultaneously running its own research programs on remote Pacific islands, programs that were technically civilian contracted, technically deniable, and technically never happened. Declassified records from 1996, released as part of the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act, which also swept in Pacific Theater documents, reference a project designated only as Program 7. No full name. No supervising officer named. The records describe a biological and environmental stability study, conducted between 1943 and 1946 on an island in the Pacific. The study involved, quote, long-term observation of the effects of sustained exposure on isolated human populations. Read that again. Slowly. Long-term observation. Sustained exposure. Isolated human populations. This was not a weather station. This was not a radio relay post. Something was being done to people, on a remote island, and then in 1947, a naval patrol stumbled onto whatever was left. The cordon went up within 72 hours. The population records disappeared. And the file grew to 300 pages that no one has ever been allowed to read in full. But here's what they didn't tell you. In 1974, an investigative journalist named Carl Morrow, a former naval correspondent who had covered the Pacific Theater, filed a series of FOIA requests targeting what he called the 1947 Pacific Containment Event. He had a source inside naval intelligence. He had partial shipping manifests. He had a photograph. The photograph, which Morrow described in letters to his editor but never published, allegedly showed the island's coastline in 1947, taken from the deck of one of the patrol vessels. He described it as showing structures that were not military in origin, and conditions that suggested the structures had been recently and rapidly abandoned. His FOIA requests were denied. All of them. He appealed through the federal system for 3 years. In 1977, a federal judge ruled that the documents fell under a national security exemption so broad it had never been applied to a civilian FOIA request before or since. The ruling was not appealed. Morrow gave a single interview to a small Pacific Affairs journal in 1979, and then, nothing. No more articles. No more requests. He retired to a town in coastal Oregon and gave no further interviews on any subject for the rest of his life. His editor from 1974, a woman named Patricia Gould, said in a 2003 oral history that Morrow had told her, shortly before going silent, that he had been visited. That someone had come to his home. And that after that visit, he told her the story was, quote, larger than either of us can protect ourselves from. Now, before we get to what researchers believe was actually happening on that island, and before we get to the one piece of evidence that the Pentagon could not fully erase, you need to understand something even stranger. Because the island itself is not the only one. And 1947 was not the first time. Investigative researchers combing through declassified Pacific Command records in the early 2000s found something no single journalist had been able to piece together alone, because each piece existed in a different archive, in a different state, under a different file designation. There were at least 4 separate naval cordon events in the Pacific between 1943 and 1952. 4 islands. 4 blackouts. 4 sets of population records that either disappeared or were never created. The 1947 event was not an anomaly. It was an iteration. The earliest documented case was 1943, a small atoll near the Marshall Islands where a civilian survey crew reported finding evidence of uninvited human occupation and signs of what their report called a biological event. The Navy responded in less than 48 hours. The survey crew was debriefed for 11 days. Their original report was classified. The version released in 1998 has 16 of its 22 pages fully redacted. When you map the 4 cordon events geographically, they form a rough corridor through the Pacific, a line of islands that also corresponds, almost exactly, to the known logistical supply routes used by Program 7's contractors between 1943 and 1946. That is not a coincidence. That is a map. And the map leads to the proof. In 2021, a retired archivist working for the National Records Administration was cataloging a batch of mislabeled boxes from a 1970s Naval Intelligence Office closure. Inside one box, misfiled under logistics records for a completely unrelated Pacific operation, was a 47-page internal naval intelligence memorandum dated March 1948. It was not classified. It had simply been put in the wrong box. For 53 years. The memo, which was uploaded to a small archival research forum before anyone understood what it was, describes in clinical bureaucratic language exactly what the 1947 patrol found. The island's population, approximately 230 people, had been subjects of an extended exposure study conducted under Program 7 by a civilian contractor whose name is redacted but whose institutional affiliation is not, the United States Naval Medical Research Institute. The study had involved introducing a biological agent into the island's water supply beginning in 1944. The population was observed without their knowledge or consent. When the war ended in 1945, the contractor teams left. But the study did not end. The observation posts were unmanned, but automated recording equipment was left in place. The 1947 patrol stumbled onto active recording equipment, and onto what remained of the population afterward. The memo describes the final population count at the time of the 1947 discovery as 11. From 230 to 11. In 3 years. With no evacuation, no medical intervention, and no record that any of the 219 people who died ever officially existed. The Navy's response, documented in the memo, was immediate containment, permanent cordon, and a directive to, quote, ensure that the geographic and demographic history of the location is rendered unresearchable. Rendered unresearchable. That is a government agency, in writing, describing the deliberate erasure of 219 human beings from the historical record. And for 53 years, it worked. The archival forum post was live for approximately 14 hours before it was removed. The archivist who uploaded it, who had shared it with a note saying only, "Does anyone know what program this refers to?" says he received a phone call from a government number the following morning. He has not commented publicly since. 2 researchers who downloaded the document before deletion published partial transcriptions. Their accounts match. The Naval Medical Research Institute, when contacted by a Pacific Affairs publication in 2022, responded with a single statement: "We have no record of any project by that designation operating in the Pacific Theater." No record. The oldest trick in the archive. Not a denial. Not a refutation. Just, no record. The island's coordinates have never been officially released. The cordon, in some form, may still be active. And somewhere in a records facility, there are 306 pages of classified naval file that would tell you everything. You now know enough to understand why they will never let you read them. 219 people. Erased. Not metaphorically, bureaucratically, systematically, with a paper trail that was itself then buried inside a mislabeled box for half a century. This is not ancient history. The youngest person alive when this happened would be in their 80s today. The institutions responsible are still operating. The records are still sealed. And the island is still there. If this broke something in you a little, good. Subscribe. We drop one of these every week, documented, sourced, and covering the history that never made the textbook. Next week, the hospital that treated patients who didn't officially exist, funded by an agency that wasn't created until 10 years after the treatments began. That one goes even deeper.